hordes of hell are marching, the evil army. I saw a demonic army so large that it stretched as far as I could see. It was separated into divisions, with each carrying a different banner. The foremost and most powerful divisions were pride, self-righteousness, respectability, selfish ambition, and unrighteous judgment. But the largest of all was jealousy. The leader of this vast army was the accuser of the brethren himself. I knew that there were many more evil divisions beyond my scope of vision, but these were the vanguard of this terrible horde from hell that was now being released against the church. The weapons carried by this horde had names on them. The swords were named intimidation. The spears were named treachery, and their arrows were named accusations, gossip, slander, and fault-finding. Scouts and smaller companies of demons with such names as rejection, bitterness, impatience, unforgiveness, and lust were sent in advance of this army to prepare for the main attack. I knew in my heart that the church had never faced anything like this before. The main assignment of this army was to cause division. It was sent to attack every level of relationship churches with each other, congregations with their pastors, husbands and wives, children and parents, and even children with each other. The scouts were sent to locate the openings in churches, families, or individuals that rejection, bitterness, lust, etc. could exploit and make a larger breach for the divisions that were coming. The most shocking part of this vision was that this horde was not riding on horses, but on Christians. Most of them were well-dressed, respectable, and had the appearance of being refined and educated. These were Christians who had opened themselves to the powers of darkness to such a degree that the enemy could use them, and they would think that they were being used by God. The accuser knows that a house divided cannot stand, and this army represented his ultimate attempt to bring such complete division to the church that she would completely fall from grace. The prisoners trailing behind these first divisions was a vast multitude of other Christians who were prisoners of this army. They were all wounded and were guarded by little demons of fear. There seemed to be more prisoners than there were demons in the army. Surprisingly, these prisoners still had their swords and shields, but they did not use them. It was shocking to see that so many could be kept captive by so few of these little demons of fear. These could have easily been destroyed or driven off if the prisoners had just used their weapons. Above the prisoners, the sky was black with vultures named depression. These would land on the shoulders of a prisoner and vomit on him. The vomit was condemnation. When the vomit hit a prisoner, he would stand up and march a little straighter for a while, and then slump over, even weaker than before. Again, I wondered why the prisoners did not simply kill these vultures with their swords, which they could have easily done. Occasionally, a weak prisoner would stumble and fall. As soon as he or she hit the ground, the other prisoners would begin stabbing them with their swords, scorning them as they did so. They would then call for the vultures to begin devouring the fallen one, even before they were dead. As I watched, I realized that these prisoners thought that the vomit of condemnation was truth from God. Then I understood that these prisoners actually thought they were marching in the army of God. This is why they did not kill the little demons of fear or the vultures. They thought that these were messengers from God. The darkness from the cloud of vultures made it so hard for these prisoners to see that they naively accepted everything that happened to them as being from the Lord. The only food provided for these prisoners was the vomit from the vultures. Those who refused to eat it simply weakened until they fell. Those who did eat it were strengthened, but with the strength of the evil one. They would then begin to vomit on the others. When one began to do this, a demon that was waiting for a ride would be given this one, and he or she would be promoted to the front divisions. Even worse than the vomit from the vultures was a repulsive slime that these demons were urinating and defecating upon the Christians they rode. This slime was the pride, selfish ambition, etc. that was the nature of the division they were a part of. However, this slime made the Christians feel so much better than the condemnation that they easily believed that the demons were messengers of God, and they actually thought this slime was the anointing of the Holy Spirit. Then the voice of the Lord came to me saying, "This is the beginning of the enemy's last day army. This is Satan's ultimate deception, and his ultimate power of destruction is released when he uses Christians to attack other Christians. Throughout the ages, he has used this army, but never has he been able to capture so many to be used for his evil purposes. Do not fear. I have an army too. You must now stand and fight, because there is no longer any place to hide from this war. You must fight for my kingdom, for truth, and for those who have been deceived." I had been so repulsed and outraged by the evil army that I had wanted to die rather than live in such a world. However, this word from the Lord was so encouraging that I immediately began yelling to the Christian prisoners that they were being deceived, thinking that they would listen to me. When I did this, it seemed that the whole army turned to look at me, but I kept yelling. I thought that the Christians were going to wake up and realize what was happening to them. But instead, many of them started reaching for their arrows to shoot at me. The others just hesitated, as if they did not know what to make of me. I knew then that I had done this prematurely, and that it had been a very foolish mistake. The battle begins. Then I turned and saw the army of the Lord standing behind me. There were thousands of soldiers, but we were still greatly outnumbered. Only a small number were fully dressed in their armor, so that most were only partially protected. A large number were already wounded. Most of those who had all of their armor still had very small shields, which I knew would not protect them from the onslaught that was coming. The majority of these soldiers were women and children. Behind this army, there was a trailing mob similar to the prisoners who followed the evil army, but very different in nature. These seemed to be very happy people and were playing games, singing songs, feasting, and roaming about from one little camp to the next. It reminded me of the atmosphere at Woodstock. I tried to raise my voice above the clamor to warn them that it was not the time for this, that the battle was about to begin, but only as few could even hear my voice. Those who did gave me the peace sign and said they did not believe in war, and that the Lord would not let anything bad happen to them. I tried to explain that the Lord had given us armor for a reason, but they just retorted that they had come to a place of peace and joy where nothing would happen to them. I began praying earnestly for the Lord to increase the faith shields of those with the armor, to help us protect those who were not ready for the battle. A messenger came up to me, gave me a trumpet, and told me to blow it quickly. I did, and those who had on at least some of their armor immediately responded, snapping to attention. More armor was brought to them, which they put on quickly. I noticed that those who had wounds did not put armor over their wounds. But before I could say anything about these enemy arrows began raining down on us. Everyone who did not have on all of his or her armor was wounded. Those who had not covered their wounds were struck again in the same place. Those who were hit by arrows of slander immediately began to slander those who were not wounded. Those who were hit with gossip began to gossip. And soon, a major division had been created within our camp. Then vultures swooped down to pick up the wounded to deliver them into the camp of prisoners. The wounded still had swords and could have smitten the vultures easily, but they didn't. They were actually carried off willingly because they were so angry at the rest of us. The scene among those in the camp behind our army was even worse. There seemed to be total chaos. Thousands lay on the ground, wounded and groaning. Many of those who were not wounded just sat in a stupor of unbelief. The wounded and those who sat in unbelief were being quickly carried away by the vultures. Some were trying to help the wounded and keep the vultures off of them, but the wounded were so angry they would threaten and drive away those who were trying to help them. Many who were not wounded were simply running as fast as they could from the scene of battle. This first encounter with the enemy was so devastating that I was tempted to join them in their flight. Then, very quickly, some of these began reappearing with full suits of armor on and large shields. The mirth of the party had changed into an awesome resolve. They began to take the places of those who had fallen and even began forming new ranks to protect the rear and flanks. These brought great courage, and everyone resolved to stand and fight until death. Immediately, 3 great angels named Faith, Hope, and Love came and stood behind us, and everyone's shield began to grow. The highway. We had swords named the Word of God, and arrows that were named for biblical truths. We wanted to shoot back, but did not know how to without hitting the Christians that were ridden by the demons. Then it occurred to us that if these Christians were hit with the truth, they would wake up and fight off their oppressors. I fired off a few arrows. Almost all of them hit Christians. However, when the arrow of truth went into them, they did not wake up or fall down wounded. They became enraged, and the demon riding on them grew much larger. This shocked everyone, and we began to feel that this may be an impossible battle to win. But with faith, hope, and love, we were very confident that we could at least hold our own ground. Another angel named Wisdom then appeared and directed us to fight from the mountain behind us. On the mountain, there were ledges at different levels, for as high as you could see. At each higher level, the ledges became narrower and harder to stand on. Each level was named after a biblical truth. The lower levels were named after foundational truths such as salvation, sanctification, prayer, faith, etc. And the higher levels were named after more advanced biblical truths. The higher we climbed, the larger both our shields and our swords grew, and fewer of the enemy arrows could reach that position. A tragic mistake. Some who had stayed on the lower levels began picking up the enemy arrows and shooting them back. This was a tragic mistake. The demons easily dodged the arrows and let them hit the Christians. When a Christian was hit by one of the arrows of accusation or slander, a demon of bitterness or rage would fly in and perch on that arrow. He would then begin to urinate and defecate his poison upon that Christian. When a Christian had 2 or 3 of these demons added to the pride or self-righteousness he already had, he began to change into the contorted image of the demons themselves. We could see this happening from the higher levels, but those on the lower levels who were using the enemy's arrows could not see it. Half of us decided to keep climbing, while the other half descended back to the lower levels to explain to those still on them what was happening. Everyone was then warned to keep climbing and not stop, except for a few who stationed themselves on each level to keep the other soldiers moving higher. Safety. When we reached the level called the Unity of the Brethren, none of the enemy's arrows could reach us. Many in our camp decided that was as far as they needed to climb. I understood this because with each new level, the footing was more precarious. However, I also felt much stronger and more skillful with my weapons the higher I went. So I continued climbing. Soon my skills were good enough to shoot and hit the demons without hitting the Christians. I felt that if I kept going higher, I could shoot far enough to hit the leaders of the evil horde who stayed behind their army. I was sorry that so many had stopped on the lower levels, where they were safe but could not hit the enemy. Even so, the strength and character that grew in those who kept climbing made them great champions, each of which I knew would destroy many of the enemy. At each level, there were arrows of truth scattered about, which I knew were left from those who had fallen from that position. All of the arrows were named after the truth of that level. Some were reluctant to pick up these arrows, but I knew we needed all that we could to destroy the great horde below. I picked one up, shot it, and so easily hit a demon that the others started picking them up and shooting them. We began to decimate several of the enemy divisions. Because of this, the entire evil army focused its attention on us. For a time, it seemed the more we achieved, the more we were opposed. Though our task seemed endless, it had become exhilarating. The word is our anchor. Our swords grew as we reached each level. I almost left mine behind because I did not seem to need it at the higher levels. I finally decided that it had been given to me for purpose, so I had better keep it. I drove it into the ground and tied myself to it while I shot at the enemy. The voice of the Lord then came to me, saying, "You have used the wisdom that will enable you to keep climbing. Many have fallen because they did not use their sword properly to anchor themselves." No one else seemed to hear this voice, but many saw what I had done and did the same thing. I wondered why the Lord had not spoken to me before I had made this decision. I then had a sense of knowing that He had already spoken this to me somehow. Then I perceived that my whole life had been training for this hour. I was prepared to the degree that I had listened to the Lord and obeyed Him throughout my life. I also knew that for some reason, the wisdom and understanding I now had could not be added to or taken away from while in this battle. I became profoundly thankful for every trial I had experienced in my life, and sorry for not appreciating them more at the time. Soon, we were hitting the demons with almost perfect accuracy. Rage rose from the enemy army like fire and brimstone. I knew that the Christians trapped in that army were now feeling the brunt of that rage. Unable to hit us, they were now shooting at each other. With his arrows now ineffective against us, the enemy sent the vultures to attack. Those who had not used their swords as anchors were able to strike down many of the vultures, but they too were being knocked from the ledges where they were standing. Some of these landed on a lower level, but some fell all the way to the bottom and were picked up and carried off by the vultures. A new weapon, the arrows of truth, would rarely penetrate the vultures, but they hurt them enough to drive them back. Every time they were driven back, some of us would climb to the next level. When we reached the level called Galatians 2:20, We were above the altitude that the vultures could fly. At this level, the sky above almost blinded us with its brightness and beauty. I felt peace like I had never felt it before. Previously, much of my fighting spirit had really been motivated out of as much hatred and disgust for the enemy as it had been for the sake of the kingdom, truth, and love for the prisoners. But it was on this level that I caught up to faith, hope, and love, which before I had only been following at a distance. On this level, I was almost overpowered by their glory. When I caught up to them, they turned to me and began repairing and shining my armor. Soon, it was completely transformed and exuded the glory that was in them. When they touched my sword, great bolts of brilliant lightning began flashing from it. Love then said, "Those who reach this level are entrusted with the powers of the age to come, but I must teach you how to use them." The Galatians 2:20 level was so wide that there was no longer any danger of falling. There were also unlimited arrows with the name Hope written on them. We shot some of them down at the vultures, and these arrows killed them easily. About half who had reached this level kept shooting while the others began carrying these arrows down to those still on the lower levels. The vultures kept coming in waves upon the levels below, but with each one there would be fewer than before. From Galatians 2:20, we could hit any enemy in the army except the leaders themselves, who were still out of range. We decided not to use the arrows of truth until we had destroyed all of the vultures, because the cloud of depression they created made the truth less effective. This took a very long time, but we never got tired. Faith, hope, and love, who had grown like our weapons with each level, were now so large that I knew people far beyond the battle area could see them. Their glory even radiated into the camp of prisoners, who was still under a great cloud of vultures. The exhilaration continued to grow in all of us. I felt that being in this army, in this battle, had to be one of the greatest adventures of all time. After destroying most of the vultures that had been attacking our mountain, we began picking off the vultures that had covered the prisoners. As the cloud of darkness began dissipating and the sun began to shine down on them, they began to wake up as if they had been in a deep sleep. They were immediately repulsed by their condition, especially by the vomit that still covered them, and began cleaning themselves up. As they beheld faith, hope, and love, they saw the mountain we were on and began running for it. The evil horde rained arrows of accusation and slander at them, but they did not stop. By the time they got to the mountain, many had a dozen or more arrows stuck in them, but seemed not to even notice. As soon as they began to scale the mountain, their wounds began to heal. With the cloud of depression being dispelled, it seemed as if everything was getting much easier. The trap. The former prisoners had great joy in their salvation. They seemed so overwhelmed with appreciation for each level as they began to scale the mountain that it gave us a greater appreciation for those truths. Soon, a fierce resolve to fight the enemy also arose in the former prisoners. They put on the armor provided and begged to be allowed to go back and attack the enemy. We thought about it, but then decided we should all stay on the mountain to fight. Again, the voice of the Lord spoke, saying, "A second time you have chosen wisdom. You cannot win if you try to fight the enemy on his own ground, but must remain on my holy mountain." I was stunned that we had made another decision of such importance by just thinking and discussing it briefly. I then resolved to do my best to not make another decision of any consequence without prayer. Wisdom then stepped up to me quickly, took both of my shoulders firmly, and looked me intensely in the eye, saying, "You must do this." I then noticed that even though I had been on the broad plateau of Galatians 2:20, I had drifted to the very edge without even knowing it and could have easily fallen. I looked again into the eyes of wisdom, and he said with the utmost seriousness, "Take heed when you think you stand, lest you fall. In this life, you can fall from any level, the serpents." For a long time, we continued killing the vultures and picking off the demons that were riding the Christians. We found that the arrows of different truths would have more of an impact on different demons. We knew that it was going to be a long battle, but we were not taking any more casualties now, and we had already passed the level of patience. Even so, after these Christians had the demons shot off them, few would come to the mountain. Many had taken on the nature of the demons and continued in their delusion without them. As the darkness of the demons dissipated, we could see the ground moving around the feet of these Christians. Then I saw that their legs were bound by serpents called shame. We shot arrows of truth at the serpents, but they had little effect. We then tried the arrows of hope, but without result. From Galatians 2:20, it was very easy to go higher, so we started up to the higher levels. Soon, we happened upon a garden that was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. Over the entrance to this garden was written, "The Father's Unconditional Love." It was the most glorious and inviting doorway I had ever seen. So we were compelled to enter. As soon as we did, we saw the tree of life in the middle of this garden. It was still guarded by angels of awesome strength. They looked as if they had been expecting us, so we had the courage to pass them and walk up to the tree. One of them said, "Those who make it to this level, who know the Father's love, can eat." I did not realize how hungry I was. When I tasted the fruit, it was better than anything I had ever tasted, but was also somehow familiar. It brought memories of sunshine, rain, beautiful fields, the sun setting over the ocean, but even more than that, of the people I loved. With every bite, I loved everything, and everyone more. Then my enemies started to come to mind, and I loved them too. The feeling was soon greater than anything I had ever experienced, even the peace on Galatians 2:20. Then I heard the voice of the Lord, and he said, "This is now your daily bread. It shall never be withheld from you. You may eat as much and as often as you like. There is no end of my love." I looked up into the tree to see where the voice had come from, and saw that it was filled with pure white eagles. They had the most beautiful, penetrating eyes I have ever seen. They were looking at me as if waiting for instructions. One of the angels said, "They will do your bidding. These eagles eat snakes." I said, "Go, devour the shame that has bound our brothers." They opened their wings, and a great wind came that lifted them into the air. These eagles filled the sky with a blinding glory. Even as high as we were, I could hear the sounds of terror from the enemy camp at the sight of these eagles coming toward them. The Lord Jesus himself then stood in our midst. He touched each one, then said, "I must now share with you what I shared with your brothers after my ascension, the message of my kingdom." The enemy's most powerful army has now been put to flight, but not destroyed. Now it is time for us to march forth with the gospel of my kingdom. The eagles have been released and will go with us. We will Take arrows from every level, but I am your sword, and I am your captain. It is now time for the sword of the Lord to be unsheathed. I then turned and saw that the entire army of the Lord was standing in that garden. There were men, women, and children from all races and nations, each carrying their banners that moved in the wind with perfect unity. I knew that nothing like this had been seen in the earth before. I knew that the enemy had many more armies and fortresses throughout the earth, but none could stand before this great army. I said almost under my breath, "This must be the day of the Lord." The whole host then answered in an awesome thunder, "The day of the Lord of hosts has come." We stood in the garden of God, under the tree of life. It seemed that the entire army was there, kneeling before the Lord Jesus. He had just given us the charge to return to the battle for the sake of our brothers who were still bound, and for the world that he still loved. It was both a wonderful and a terrible command. It was wonderful just because it came from him. It was terrible because it implied that we would have to leave his manifest presence and the garden that was more beautiful than anything I had ever seen before. To leave all of this to go into battle seemed incomprehensible. The Lord continued his exhortation. "I have given you spiritual gifts and power and an increasing understanding of my word and my kingdom. But the greatest weapon that you have been given is the Father's love. As long as you walk in my Father's love, you will never fail. The fruit of this tree is the Father's love, which is manifested in me. This love, which is in me, must be your daily bread." The Lord was not what we might consider to be of a strikingly handsome appearance, but was rather ordinary. Even so, the grace with which he moved and spoke made him the most attractive person I had ever seen. He was beyond human definition in dignity and nobility. No painting that has sought to capture what he looked like could ever do it, but somehow, most of them do resemble him. I began to think of how he was everything that the Father loves and esteems. He truly is full of grace and truth, to the point that it seemed that nothing but grace and truth should ever matter. When I ate the fruit from the tree of life, the thought of every good thing I had ever known seemed to fill my soul. When Jesus spoke, it was the same, only magnified. I never wanted to leave this place. I remembered how I had once thought it must have been boring for those angels who did nothing but worship him before the throne. Now I knew that there was nothing more wonderful or exhilarating than simply worshiping him. That would surely be the best part of heaven. It was hard to believe that I had struggled so much with boredom during worship services. I knew that it was only because I had been almost completely out of touch with the reality during those times. Worship in spirit and truth. I was almost overwhelmed with the desire to go back and make up those times during worship when I had allowed my mind to wander or had occupied myself with other things. The desire to express my adoration for him became almost uncontrollable. I had to praise him. As I opened my mouth, I was shocked by the spontaneous worship that erupted from the entire army at the same time. I had almost forgotten that anyone else was there, but we were all in perfect unity. The glorious worship couldn't be expressed in human language. As we worshiped, a golden glow began to emanate from the Lord. Then there was silver around the gold. Then colors, the richness of which I have never seen with my natural eyes, enveloped us all. With this glory, I entered a realm of emotion that I had never experienced before. Somehow I understood that his glory had been there all along, but when we focused on Him the way that we did in worship, we simply began to see more of His glory. The more intensely we worshiped, the more glory we beheld. If this was heaven, it was much, much better than I had ever dreamed. Finding His dwelling place. I have no idea how long this worship lasted. It could have been months. There was simply no way to measure time in that kind of glory. For a time, I closed my eyes because the glory I was seeing with my heart was as great as what I was seeing with my physical eyes. When I opened my eyes, I was surprised to see that the Lord was not there any longer, but a troop of angels was standing where He had been. One of them stepped up to me and said, "Close your eyes again." When I did, I beheld the glory of the Lord again and was greatly relieved. Then the angel explained, "What you see with the eyes of your heart is more real than what you see with your physical eyes." I had myself made this statement many times, but how little I had truly walked in it. The angel continued, "It was for this reason that the Lord told His first disciples that it was better for Him to go away so that the Holy Spirit could come. The Lord dwells within you. I have taught this many times, but now you must live it, for you have eaten of the tree of life." The angel then began to lead me back to the gate. I protested that I did not want to leave. Looking surprised, the angel took me by the shoulders and looked me in the eyes. That is when I recognized him as the angel, wisdom. You never have to leave this garden. This garden is in your heart, because the Creator Himself is within you. You have desired the best part, to worship and sit in His presence forever, and it will never be taken from you. I acknowledged what wisdom had said, and then looked past him at the fruit on the tree of life. I had a compulsion to grab all that I could before leaving. Knowing my thoughts, wisdom gently shook me. No, even this fruit gathered in fear would rot. This fruit and this tree are within you because He is in you. You must believe. I closed my eyes and tried to see the Lord again, but couldn't. When I opened my eyes, wisdom was still staring at me. With great patience, he continued, "You have tasted of the heavenly realm, and no one ever wants to go back to the battle once they do. No one ever wants to leave the manifest presence of the Lord. When the Apostle Paul came here, he struggled for the rest of his life as to whether he should stay and labor for the Lord or return here to enter into his inheritance. But his inheritance was magnified the longer he stayed. Now that you have the heart of a true worshiper, you will always want to be here, and you can when you enter into true worship. The more focused you are on Him, and the more glory you will see, regardless of where you are." Wisdom's words had finally calmed me. Again, I closed my eyes, just to thank the Lord for this wonderful experience and the life He had given me. As I did, I started to see His glory again, and all of the emotion of the previous worship experience flooded my soul. The Lord's words to me were so loud and clear that I was sure they were audible. "I will never leave or forsake you." "Lord, forgive my unbelief," I responded. "Please help me to never leave or forsake you." Walking with wisdom. As I opened my eyes, wisdom was still gripping my shoulders. "I am the primary gift that has been given to you for your work," he said. "I will show you the way, and I will keep you on it. But only love will keep you faithful. The highest wisdom is to love the Lord." Then wisdom released me and started to walk toward the gate. I followed with ambivalence. I remembered the exhilaration of the battle and the climb up the mountain, and it was compelling. But there was no comparison to the presence of the Lord and the worship I had just experienced. Leaving this would be the greatest sacrifice I had ever made. Then I remembered how it was all inside of me, amazed that I could even forget that so quickly. I began to think about the great battle that was raging within me, between what I saw with my physical eyes and what I saw with my heart. I moved forward so that I was walking beside wisdom and asked, "I have prayed for 26 years to be caught up into the third heaven as Paul had. Is this the third heaven?" "This is part of it," he replied, "but there is much more." "Will I be allowed to see more?" I asked. "You will see much more. I am taking you to see more now," he replied. I started thinking of the book of Revelation. Was John's revelation part of the third heaven? I asked. Part of John's revelation was from the third heaven, but most of it was from the second heaven. The first heaven was before the fall of man. The second heaven is the spiritual realm during the reign of evil upon the earth. The third heaven is when the love and domain of the Father will again prevail over the earth through your King. What was the first heaven like? I inquired, strangely feeling a cold chill as I asked. It is wisdom not to be concerned about that now. My companion responded with increased seriousness as my question seemed to jolt him. Wisdom is to seek to know the third heaven, just as you have. There is much more to know about the third heaven than you can know in this life. And it is the third heaven, the kingdom, that you much preach in this life. In the ages to come, you will be told about the first heaven, but it is not profitable for you to know at this time. I resolved to remember the cold chill I had just felt, and wisdom nodded, which I knew to be an affirmation to that thought. What a great companion you are, I had to say, as I was just flooded with appreciation for this angel. You really will keep me on the right path. I will indeed, he replied. I was sure I felt love coming from this angel, which was unique, since I had never felt this from other angels, which showed more of a concern out of duty than love. Wisdom responded to my thoughts as if I had spoken them out loud. It is wisdom to love, and I could not be wisdom if I did not love you. It is also wisdom to behold the kindness and the severity of God. It is wisdom to love him and fear him. You are in deception to do otherwise. This is the next lesson that you must learn, he said with unmistakable earnest. I do know that, and have taught it many times, I responded, feeling for the first time that maybe wisdom did not fully know me. I have been your companion for a very long time, and I know your teachings, wisdom replied. Now you are about to learn what some of your own teachings mean. As you have said many times, it is not by believing in your mind, but in your heart, that results in righteousness. I apologized, feeling a bit ashamed at having even questioned wisdom. He graciously accepted my apology. It was then that I realized I had been questioning and challenging him most of my life, often to my injury. The other half of love. There are times to adore the Lord, wisdom continued, and there are times to honor him with the greatest fear and respect. Just as there is a time to plant and a time to reap, and it is wisdom to know the time for each. True wisdom knows the times and seasons of God. I brought you here because it was time to worship the Lord in the glory of his love. I am now taking you to another place because it is time for you to worship him in the fear of his judgment. Until you know both, we can be separated from each other. Do you mean that if I had stayed back there in that glorious worship, I would have lost you? I asked in disbelief. Yes, I would have always visited with you when I could, but we would have rarely crossed paths. It is hard to leave such glory and peace. But that is not the whole revelation of the King. He is both the Lion of Judah and the Lamb. To the spiritual children, he is the Lamb. To the maturing, he is the Lion. To the fully mature, he is both the Lion and the Lamb. You have known this in your mind, and I have heard you teach it, but now you will know it in your heart, for you are about to experience the judgment seat of Christ. The return to the battle. Before leaving the gates to the garden, I asked Wisdom if I could just sit for a while to ponder all that I had just experienced. Yes, you should do this, he replied, but I have a better place for you to do it. I followed Wisdom out of the gates, and we began to descend down the mountain. To my surprise, the battle was still going on, but not nearly as intensely as it was when we ascended. There were still arrows of accusation and slander flying about on the lower levels, but most of the enemy horde that was left was furiously attacking the great white eagles. The eagles were easily prevailing. We kept descending until we were almost at the bottom. Just above the levels of salvation and sanctification was the level thanksgiving and praise. I remembered this level very well because one of the greatest attacks of the enemy came as I first tried to reach it. Once we got here, the rest of the climb was much easier. And if an arrow got through your armor, it healed much faster. As soon as the enemy spotted me on this level, the enemy could not see Wisdom. A shower of arrows began to rain down on me. I so easily knocked them down with my shield that the enemy quit shooting. Their arrows were now almost gone, and they could not afford to waste any more. The soldiers who were still fighting from this level looked at me in astonishment with a deference that made me very uncomfortable. It was then that I first noticed that the glory of the Lord was emanating from my armor and shield. I told them to climb to the top of the mountain without stopping, and they too would see the Lord. As soon as they agreed to go, they saw Wisdom. They started fall down to worship him, but he restrained them and sent them on their way. The faithful. I was filled with love for these soldiers, many of whom were women and children. Their armor was a mess, and they were covered in blood, but they had not quit. In fact, they were still cheerful and encouraged. I told them that they were deserving of more honor than I was, because they had borne the greatest burden of the battle and had held their ground. They seemed not to believe me, but appreciated that I would say it. However, I really felt that it was true. Every level on the mountain had to be occupied, or the vultures that were left would come and foul it with vomit and excrement until it was difficult to stand on. Most of the ledges were occupied by soldiers who I recognized to be from different denominations or movements, which emphasized the truth of the level they were defending. I was embarrassed by the attitude I had maintained towards some of these groups. I had considered some of them out of touch and backslidden at best. But here, they were fighting faithfully against a terrible onslaught of the enemy. Their defense of these positions had probably enabled me to keep climbing as I had. Some of these levels were situated so that there was a view of a good part of the mountain or battlefield. But some were so isolated that the soldiers on them could only see their own position and seemed not to even know about the rest of the battle raging. They were often so wounded from the slander and accusations that they would be resistant when someone came down to them from a higher level and encouraged them to climb higher. However, when some began to come down from the top, reflecting the glory of the Lord, they listened with great joy and soon began to climb themselves with courage and resolve. As I beheld all of this, Wisdom did not say much, but he seemed very interested in my reactions. Reality. Discovered. I watched as many soldiers who had been to the top began descending to all of the levels to relieve those who had been taking their stand on those truths. As they did, each level began to shine with the glory they carried. Soon, the whole mountain was beginning to shine with a glory that was blinding to the vultures and demons that were left. Soon, there was so much glory that the mountain began to have the same feel as the garden. I started thanking and praising the Lord, and immediately I was in His presence again. It was hard to contain the emotions and glory that was flooding my innermost being. The experience became so intense that I stopped. Wisdom was standing beside me. Putting his hand on my shoulder, he said, "You enter His gates with thanksgiving, His courts with praise." But that was so real. I felt like I was there again, I exclaimed. "You were there," replied Wisdom. "It has not gotten more real, but you have. Just as the Lord told the thief on the cross, 'Today, you will be with me in paradise.' You can enter paradise at any time. The Lord, His paradise, and this mountain are all abiding in you because He is in you. What were but foretastes before are now a reality to you because you have climbed the mountain. The reason that you can see me and others cannot is not because you have entered the one in which I dwell. This is the reality that the prophets knew, that gave them great boldness even when they stood alone against armies. The deadly trap. I then looked out over the carnage below and the slowly retreating demonic army. Behind me, more of the glorious warriors were constantly taking their places on the mountain. I knew there was now enough to attack and destroy what was left of this enemy horde. "Not yet," said Wisdom. "Look over there." I looked in the direction in which he was pointing, but had to shield my eyes from the glory emanating from my own armor to see anything. Then I caught a glimpse of movement in a valley. I could not make out what I was seeing, because the glory being emitted from my armor made it difficult to see into the darkness. I asked Wisdom to give me something to cover my armor with, so I could see it. He then gave me a very plain mantle to put on. "What is this?" I inquired, a little insulted by its drabness. "Humility," said Wisdom. "You will not be able to see very well without it." Reluctantly, I put it on, and immediately I saw many things that I could not see before. I looked toward the valley, and the movement I had seen. To my astonishment, there was an entire division of the enemy horde that was waiting to ambush anyone who ventures from the mountain. "What army is that?" I asked, "and how did they escape the battle intact?" "That is pride," explained Wisdom. "That is the hardest enemy to see after you have been in the glory. Those who refuse to put on this cloak will suffer much at the hands of this most devious enemy." As I looked back at the mountain, I saw many of the glorious warriors crossing the plain to attack the remnants of the enemy horde. None of them were wearing the cloaks of humility, and they had not seen the enemy that was ready to attack them from the rear. I started to run out to stop them, but Wisdom restrained me. "You cannot stop this," he said. "Only the soldiers who wear this cloak will recognize your authority. Come with me. There is something else that you must see before you can help lead in the great battle that is to come, the foundation of glory." Wisdom led me down the mountain to the very lowest level, which was named salvation. "You think that this is the lowest level," declared Wisdom, "but this is the foundation of the whole mountain. In any journey, the first step is the most important, and it is usually the most difficult. Without salvation, there would be no mountain." I was appalled by the carnage on this level. Every soldier was very badly wounded, but none of them were dead. Multitudes were barely clinging to the edge. Many seemed ready to fall off at any moment, but none did. Angels were everywhere, ministering to the soldiers with such great joy that I asked, why are they so happy? These angels have beheld the courage that it took for these to hold on. They may not have gone any further, but neither did they give up. They will soon be healed, and then they will behold the glory of the rest of the mountain and begin to climb. These will be great warriors for the battle to come. But wouldn't they have been better off to climb the mountain with the rest of us? I protested, seeing their present condition. It would have been better for them, but not for you. By staying here, they made it easier for you to climb, by keeping most of the enemy occupied. Very few from the higher levels ever reached out to help others come to the mountain, but these did. Even when these were barely clinging to the mountain themselves, they would reach out to pull others up. In fact, most of the mighty warriors were led to the mountain by these faithful ones. These are no less heroes than those who made it to the top. They brought great joy to heaven by continually leading others to salvation. It was for this reason that all the angels in heaven wanted to come to minister to them, but only the most honored were permitted. Again, I felt a terrible shame at my attitude toward these great saints. Many of us scorned them as we climbed to the higher levels. They had made many mistakes during the battle, but they had also displayed more of the shepherd's heart than the rest of us. The Lord would leave the 99 to go after the one who was lost. These had stayed in the place where they could still reach the lost, and they paid a dear price for it. I too wanted to help, but did not know where to start. Wisdom then said, "It is right for you to want to help, but you will help most by going on to what you have been called to do. These will all be healed and will quickly climb the mountain. They will join you again in the battle. These are fearless ones who will never retreat before the enemy." The power of pride. I was thinking how descending the mountain was teaching me as much as climbing it had, when noise from the battlefield drew my attention. By now, there were thousands of the mighty warriors who had crossed the plain to attack the remnant of the enemy horde. The enemy was fleeing in all directions, except for the one division, pride. Completely undetected, it had marched right up to the rear of the advancing warriors and was about to release a hail of arrows. It was then that I noticed the mighty warriors had not armor on their backsides. They were totally exposed and vulnerable to what was about to hit them. Wisdom then remarked, "You have taught that there was no armor for the backside, which meant that you were vulnerable if you fanned from the enemy. However, you never saw how it made you vulnerable if you advanced in pride." I could only nod my acknowledgement. It was too late to do anything, and it was unbearable to watch. But wisdom said that I must. To my amazement, when the arrows of pride struck the warriors, they did not even notice. However, the enemy kept shooting. The warriors were bleeding and getting weaker fast, but would not acknowledge it. Soon they were too weak to hold up their shields and swords, and cast them down, declaring that they did not need them anymore. Then they started taking off their armor, saying it was not needed anymore either. Then another enemy division appeared and moved up swiftly. It was called Strong Delusion. They released a hail of arrows that all hit their mark. I then watched as just a few of the demons of delusion led off this once great army of glorious warriors. They were taken to different prison camps, each named after a different doctrine of demons. I was astounded at how this great company of the righteous had been so utterly defeated, and they still did not even know what had hit them. How could those who were so strong, who have been all the way to the top of the mountain, who have seen the Lord as they have, be so vulnerable? I blurted out. Pride is the hardest enemy to see, and it always sneaks up behind you, Wisdom lamented. In some ways, those who have been to the greatest heights are in the greatest danger of falling. You must always remember that in this life, you can fall at any time from any level. Take heed when you think you stand, lest you fall. When you think you are the least vulnerable to falling is in fact when you are the most vulnerable. Most men fall right after a great victory. Wisdom for the battle. How can we keep from being attacked like this? I asked. Stay close to me. Inquire the Lord before making any major decisions, and keep that mantle on, and the enemy will never be able to blindside you as he did those. I looked at my mantle. It looked so plain and insignificant. I felt that it made me look more like a homeless person than a warrior. Wisdom responded as if I had been speaking out loud. The Lord is closer to the homeless than to princes. You only have true strength to the degree that you walk in the grace of God, and He gives His grace to the humble. No enemy weapon can penetrate this mantle, because nothing can overpower His grace. As long as you wear this mantle, you are safe from this kind of attack. I then started to look up to see how many warriors were still on the mountain. I was shocked to see how few there were. I then noticed that they all had on the same mantle on humility. How did that happen? I inquired. When they saw the battle you just witnessed, they all came to me for help, and I gave them their mantles, Wisdom replied. But I thought you were with me that whole time. I am with all who go forth to do the will of the Father, Wisdom answered. You're the Lord, I cried. Yes, he answered. I told you that I would never leave you or forsake you. I am with all of my warriors, just as I am with you. I will be to you whatever you need to accomplish my will, and you have needed wisdom. Then he vanished. Rank in the kingdom. I was left standing in the midst of the great company of angels who were ministering to the wounded on the level of salvation. As I began to walk past these angels, they bowed to one knee and showed me the greatest respect. I finally asked one of them why they did this, as even the smallest was much more powerful than I was. Because of the mantle, he replied. That is the highest rank in the kingdom. This is just a plain mantle, I protested. No, the angel protested. You are clothed in the grace of God. There is no greater power than that. But there are thousands of us, all wearing the same mantle. How could it represent rank? You are the dread champions, the sons and daughters of the King. He wore the same mantle when he walked on this earth. As long as you are clothed in that, there is no power in heaven or earth that can stand before you. Everyone in heaven and hell recognizes that mantle. We are his servants, but he abides in you, and you are clothed in his grace. Somehow I knew if I had not been wearing the mantle, and if my glorious armor had been exposed, that the angel's statement, and their behavior toward me could have really fed my pride. It was simply impossible to feel prideful or arrogant while wearing such a drab, plain cloak. However, my confidence in the mantle was growing fast. The return of the eagles. Then on the horizon, I saw a great white cloud approaching. Hope arose in me just by seeing it. It actually filled the atmosphere with hope, just as the sun rising chases away the darkness of night. As it grew closer, I recognized the great white eagle that had flown from the tree of life. They began landing on the mountain, taking their place on every level beside the companies of warriors. I carefully and respectfully approached the eagle who had landed near me because his presence was so awesome. When he looked at me with his penetrating eyes, I knew I could hide nothing from him. His eyes were so fierce and resolute that I trembled as chills ran through me just looking at them. Before I could even ask, he answered me. You want to know who we are. We are the hidden prophets who have been kept for this hour. We are the eyes of those who have been given the divinely powerful weapons. We have been shown all that the Lord is doing and all that the enemy is planning against you. We have scoured the earth, and together we know all that needs to be known for the battle. Did you not see the battle that just took place? I asked with as much irritation as I dared to express. Couldn't you have helped those warriors that were just taken captive? Yes, we saw it all, and we could have helped if they had wanted it. But our help would have been to restrain them. We can only fight in the battles that the Father commands, and we can only help those who believe in us. Only those who receive us as who we are, the prophets, can receive the prophet's reward or the benefit of our service. Those who were ambushed did not yet have the mantle that you are wearing, and those who do not have the mantle cannot understand who we are. We all need each other, including these here who are still wounded, and many others who you do not yet know. The eagle. By talking to the eagle, I started very quickly to think like the eagle. After this short discussion, I could see into the eagle's heart and know him like he knew me. The eagle recognized this. You have some of our gifts, the eagle noted, though they are not very well developed. You have not used them much. I am here to awaken these gifts in many of you and to teach you to use them. In this way, our communication will be sure. It must be sure, or we will all suffer many unnecessary losses, not to mention missing many great opportunities for victory. Where did you just come from? I asked. We eat snakes, the eagle replied. The enemy is bread for us. Our sustenance comes from doing the Father's will, which is to destroy the works of the devil. Every snake that we eat helps to increase our vision. Every stronghold of the enemy that we tear down strengthens us so we can soar higher and stay in the air longer. We have just come from a feast, devouring the serpents of shame who have bound many of your brothers and sisters. They will be here soon. They are coming with the eagles we left behind to help them find the way and to protect them from the enemy's counterattacks. These eagles were very sure of themselves, but not cocky. They knew who they were, what they were called to do. They also knew us, and they knew the future. Their confidence was reassuring to me, but even more so to the wounded that were still lying all around us. Those who had recently been too weak to talk were actually sitting up, listening to my conversation with the eagle. They looked at him like a lost child would look to his parent who had just found him. The wind of the Spirit. When the eagle looked upon the wounded, his countenance changed as well. In place of the fierce resolution I had stood before, toward the wounded he was like a soft, compassionate old grandfather. The eagle opened his wings and began to gently flap them, stirring up a cool, refreshing breeze that flowed over the wounded. It was not like any other breeze I had ever felt before. With each breath, I felt I was gaining strength and clarity of mind. Soon, the wounded were standing and worshiping God with a sincerity that brought tears to my eyes. Again, I felt a profound shame at having scorned those who stayed on this level. They had seemed so weak and foolish to those of us who were ascending the mountain. But they had endured much more than we had and remained faithful. God had kept them, and they loved Him with a great love. I looked up at the mountain. All of the eagles were gently flapping their wings. Everyone on the mountain was being refreshed by the breeze. They were stirring up, and everyone on the mountain was beginning to worship the Lord. At first, there was some discord between the worship that was coming from the different levels. But after a time, everyone on every level was singing in perfect harmony. Never on earth had I heard anything that beautiful. I never wanted it to end. Soon I recognized it as the same worship that we had known in the garden. But now it sounded even more full and rich. I knew that it was because we were worshiping in the very presence of our enemies, in the midst of such darkness and evil that surrounded the mountain, that it seemed so much more beautiful. I did not know whether this worship lasted hours, days, or minutes, but eventually the eagles stopped flapping their wings, and it stopped. Why did you stop? I asked the eagle that I had been talking to. Because they are now whole, he replied, indicating the wounded who were now all standing and appeared to be in perfect condition. True worship can heal any wound, he added. Please do it again, I begged. We will do this many times, but it is not for us to decide when. The breeze that you felt was the Holy Spirit. He directs us. We do not direct Him. He has healed the wounded and begun to bring about the unity that is required for the battles ahead. True worship also pours the precious oil upon the head, Jesus, which then flows down over the entire body, making us one with Him and each other. No one who becomes one with Him will remain wounded or unclean. His blood is pure life, and it flows when we are joined to Him. When we are joined to Him, we are also joined to the rest of the body, so that His blood flows through all. Is that not how you heal a wound to your body? By closing the wound, so that the blood can flow to the wounded member to bring regeneration? When a part of His body is wounded, we must join in unity with that part until it is fully restored. We are all one in Him. The euphoria from the worship was still prevailing, so that this little teaching seemed to be the most profound that I had ever heard, even though I had known it and taught it myself before. When the Holy Spirit moved, every word seemed glorious, regardless of how elementary it was. It also filled me with so much love that I wanted to hug everyone, including the fierce old eagles. Then, like a jolt, I remembered the mighty warriors who had just been captured. The eagle sensed this but didn't say anything. He just watched me intently. Finally, I spoke up. Can we recover those who were just lost? The wounded heart of the king. Yes, it is right for you to feel what you do, the eagle finally said. We are not complete and Our worship is not complete until the whole body is restored. Even in the most glorious worship, even in the very presence of the King, we will all feel this emptiness until all are one, because our King also feels it. We all grieve for our brothers in bondage, but we grieve even more for the heart of our King. Just as you love all of your children, but would be grieved for the one that was sick or wounded, He too loves all of His children, but the wounded and oppressed have most of His attention now. For His sake, we must not quit until all have been recovered. As long as any are wounded, He is wounded. Faith that moves mountains. Sitting down by the eagle, I thought deeply about what he said. Finally, I asked, I know that wisdom now speaks to me through you, because I hear His voice when you speak. I was so sure of myself before that last battle, but I was almost carried away with the same presumption that they were carried away with, and could very easily have been captured with them if wisdom had not stopped me. I was going out of hatred for the enemy more than wanting to set my brothers free, though that was part of my motive. Since first coming to this mountain and fighting in the great battle, I now think that most of the right things I did for the wrong reasons. And many of the wrong things I did, I had good motives for. The more I learn, the more unsure of myself I feel. You must have been with wisdom a long time, the eagle responded. He was with me a long time before I began to recognize him, but I am afraid that most of the time I was resisting him. Somehow I now know that I am still lacking something very important, something that I must have before I go into battle again, but I do not know what it is. The great eagle's eyes became more penetrating than I'd ever seen them as he responded, you also know the voice of wisdom when he speaks to you in your own heart. You are learning well because you have the mantle. What you are feeling now is the true faith. Faith! I shot back. I'm talking about serious doubts. You are wise to doubt yourself. But true faith depends on God, not yourself, and not your faith. You are close to the kind of faith that can move this mountain. And move it must. It is time to carry it to places that it has not gone to before. However, you are right. You are still lacking something very important. You must yet have a great revelation of the King. Even though you have climbed to the top of the mountain and received from every truth along the way, and even though you have stood in the garden of God, tasted of His unconditional love, and have seen His Son many times now, you still only understand a part of the whole counsel of God, and that only superficially. I knew that this was so true that it was very comforting to hear it. I have judged so many people in so many situations wrongly. Wisdom has saved my life many times now. But the voice of wisdom is still a very small voice within me. And the clamor of my own thoughts and feelings are still far too loud. I hear wisdom speaking through you much louder than I hear Him in my own heart. So I know I must stay very close to you. We are here because you need us, the eagle replied. We are also here because we need you. You have been given gifts that I do not have, and I have been given gifts that you do not have. You have experienced things that I have not experienced, and I have experienced things that you have not known. The eagles have been given to you until the end, and you have been given to us. I will be very close to you for a time, and then you must receive other eagles in my place. Every eagle is different. It is together that we have been given to know the secrets of the Lord, not individually. The doors of truth. The eagle then lifted up from the rock on which he had been perched and soared over the edge of the level on which we stood. "Come," he said. As I approached him, I saw steps that led down to the very base of the mountain. There was a small door. "Why have I not seen this before?" I asked. "When you first came to the mountain, you did not stay on this level long enough to look around," he answered. "How did you know that? Were you here when I first came to the mountain?" "I would have known if I had not been here, because all who miss this door do so for the same reason. But in fact, I was here," he responded. "I was one of the soldiers you so quickly passed on your way up the mountain." It was then that I recognized the eagle as a man whom I had met soon after my conversion, whom I had actually had a few conversations with. He continued, "I wanted badly to follow you then. I had been on this level for so long that I needed a change. I just could not leave all of the lost souls that I was still trying to lead here. When I finally committed myself to doing the Lord's will, whether it was to stay or go, wisdom appeared to me and showed me this door. He said it was a shortcut to the top. That is how I got to the top before you did, and was changed into an eagle." I then remembered that I had seen doors like this on a couple of the levels. I had even peeked into a couple of them, and remember how amazed I had been at what I saw. I did not venture into any of them very far, because I was so focused on the battle and trying to get to the top of the mountain. Could I have entered any of those doors and gone right to the top? I asked. "It is not quite that easy," the eagle remarked, seeming a little irritated. "In every door there are passageways, one of which leads to the top." Obviously knowing my next question, he continued, "The other ones lead to the other levels on the mountain. The Father designed each so that everyone would choose the one that their level of maturity dictated that they needed." Incredible. How did he do that? I thought to myself. But the eagle heard my thoughts. "It was very simple," continued the eagle, as if I had spoken my thoughts out loud. "Spiritual maturity is always determined by the willingness of one to sacrifice their own desires for the interests of the kingdom or for the sake of others." I was carefully noting all that was said. I somehow knew that I must enter the door before me, and that it would be wise for me to learn all that I could from someone who had been there before and had obviously chosen the right door to the top. I did not go directly to the top, and neither have I met anyone who has, the eagle continued. "But I went there much faster than most, because I had learned so much about self-sacrifice while fighting here on the level of salvation. I have shown you this door because you wear the mantle and would have found it anyway. But the time is short, and I am here to help you mature quickly. There are doors on every level, and everyone leads to treasures that are beyond your comprehension. They cannot be acquired physically, but every treasure that you hold in your hands, you will be able to carry on in your heart. Your heart is meant to be the treasure house of God. But the time you reach the top again, your heart will contain treasures more valuable than all of the treasures of the whole earth. They will never be taken from you, but they are yours for eternity, because you are God's. Go quickly. The storm clouds are now gathering,
and the great battle is near. Should you go with me? I pleaded. No, he responded. This is where I now belong. I have much to do to help these who were wounded, but I will see you here again. You will meet many of my brother and sister, eagles, before you return, and they will be able to help you better than I at the place where you meet them, the treasures of heaven. I already loved that eagle so much that I could hardly stand to leave him. I was glad to know I would see him again. Now, the door was drawing me like a magnet. I opened it and entered. The glory that I beheld was so stunning that I immediately fell to my knees. The gold, silver, and precious stones were far more beautiful than anything I had ever seen on the earth. The room was so large that it seemed to be without end. The floor was silver, the pillars gold, and the ceiling was pure diamond that emitted every color I had ever known, and many that I had not known. Angels without number were everywhere, dressed in different robes and uniforms that were of no earthly origin. As I began to walk through the room, the angels all bowed in salute. One stepped forward and welcomed me by name. He explained that I could go anywhere and see anything that I wanted in the room. Nothing was withheld from those who came through the door. I could not even speak. I was so overwhelmed by the beauty. I finally remarked that this was even more beautiful than the garden had been. Surprised, the angel responded, "This is the garden. This is one of the rooms in your father's house. We are your servants." As I walked, a great company of angels followed me. I turned and asked the leader why they were following. "Because of the mantle," he said. "We have been given to you to serve you here and in the battle to come." I did not know what to do with the angel, so I just continued walking. I was attracted to a large blue stone that appeared to have the sun and clouds within it. When I touched it, the same feeling flooded over me as when I ate the fruit of the tree of life. I felt energy, great mental clarity, and love for everyone and everything being magnified. I started to behold the glory of the Lord. The longer I touched the stone, the more the glory increased. I never wanted to take my hand off of the stone, but the glory became so intense that I had to look away. Then my eyes fell on a beautiful green stone. "What does that one have in it?" I asked the angel standing nearby. "All of these stones are the treasures of salvation. You are now touching the heavenly realm, and that one is the restoration of life," he continued. As I touched the green stone, I began to see the earth in rich and spectacular colors. They grew in richness, and the longer I had my hand on the stone, and my love for all that I saw grew. Then I began to see a harmony between all living things on a level that I had never seen before. Then I began to see the glory of the Lord in the creation. It began to grow until, again, I had to turn away because of the intensity. Then I realized that I had no idea how long I had been there. I did know that my comprehension of God and His universe had grown substantially by just touching these two stones. And there were many, many more. There was more in that one room than a person could have absorbed in a whole lifetime. "How many more rooms are there?" I asked the angel. "There are rooms like this on every level of the mountain that you climbed." "How can one ever experience all that is in just one of these rooms, much less all of them?" I asked. "You have forever to do this. The treasures contained in the most basic truths of the Lord Jesus are enough to last for many of your present lifetimes. No man can know all that there is to know about any of them in just one life, but you must take what you need and keep proceeding toward your destiny. I started thinking about the impending battle again and the warriors who had been captured. It was not a pleasant thought in such a glorious place, but I knew I would have forever to come back to this room, and only had a short time to find my way back to the top of the mountain, and then back to the battle from again. I turned to the angel. "You must help me find the door that leads to the top." The angel looked perplexed. "We are your servants," he responded, but you must lead us. This whole mountain is a mystery to us. We all desired to look into this great mystery, but after we leave this room that we have come to know just a little about, we will be learning even more than you. "Do you know where all of the doors are?" I asked. "Yes, but we do not know where they lead. There are some that look very inviting, and some that are plain, and some that are actually repulsive. One is even terrible. In this place, there are doors that are repulsive." I asked in disbelief. "And one that is terrible. How can that be?" "We do not know, but I can show it to you," he responded. "Please do," I said. We walked for quite a time, passing treasures unspeakable, all of which I had great difficulty not stopping to touch. There were also many doors, with different biblical truths over each one. When the angel had called them inviting, I felt that he had quite understated their appeal. I badly wanted to go through each one, but my curiosity about the terrible door kept me moving. Then I saw it. Terrible had also been an understatement. Fear gripped me so that it took my breath away. Grace and truth. I turned away from the door and retreated fast. There was a beautiful red stone nearby, which I almost lunged at to lay my hands on it. Immediately I was in the Garden of Gethsemane, beholding the Lord in prayer. The agony I beheld was even more terrible than the door I had just seen. Shocked, I jerked my hand away from the stone and fell to the floor in exhaustion. I badly wanted to return to the blue or green stones, but I had to regather my energy and sense of direction. The angels were quickly all around me, serving me. I was given a drink that began to revive me. Soon I was feeling well enough to stand and begin walking back to the other stones. However, the recurring vision of the Lord praying compelled me to stop. "What was that back there?" I asked. "When you touch the stones, we are able to see a little of what you see and feel a little of what you feel," said the angel. "We know that all of these stones are great treasures, and all of the revelations they contain are priceless. We beheld for a moment the agony of the Lord before his crucifixion, and we felt briefly what he felt that terrible night. It is hard for us to understand how our God could ever suffer like that. It makes us appreciate much more what an honor it is to serve you, whom he did it for." The angel's words were like lightning bolts, straight to my soul. I had fought in the great battle. I had climbed to the top of the mountain. I had become so familiar with the spiritual realm that I hardly noticed angels anymore, and I could speak on nearly equal terms with the great eagles. Yet I could not bear to share in even a moment of the sufferings of my king without wanting to flee to a more pleasurable experience. "I should not be here," I almost shouted. "I more than anyone deserve to be a prisoner of the evil one." "Sir," the angel said almost shyly, "we understand that no one is here because they deserve it. You are here because you were chosen before the foundation of the world for a purpose. We do not know what your purpose is, but we know that it is very great for everyone on this mountain. Thank you, you are most helpful. My emotions are being greatly stretched by this place, and they have tended to overcome my understanding. You are right. No one is here because they are worthy. Truly, the higher we climb on this mountain, the more unworthy we are to be there, and the more grace we need to stay there. How did I ever make it to the top the first time? Grace, my angel responded. If you want to help me, I then said, please keep repeating that word to me whenever you see me in confusion or despair. That word I am coming to understand better than any other, and it always brings great illumination to my soul. Now, I must go back to the red stone. I know now that is the greatest treasure in this room, and I must not leave until I am carrying that treasure in my heart. I said with more resolution in my words than I felt in my heart at that time, but I nevertheless knew that it was true, the truth of grace. The time that I spent at the red stone was the most painful that I have ever experienced. Many times I simply could not take any more, but had to withdraw my hand. Several times I went back to the blue or green stones to rejuvenate my soul before I returned. It was extremely hard to return to the red stone each time, but my love and appreciation for the Lord was growing through this, more than anything I had ever learned or experienced. Finally, when the presence of the Father departed from Jesus on the cross, I could not stand it anymore. I quit. I could tell that the angels, who were also experiencing what I was, were in full agreement. The willpower to touch the stone again simply was not in me anymore. I didn't even feel like going back to the blue stone. I just laid on the floor, weeping over what the Lord had gone through. I also wept because I knew that I had deserted him, just like his disciples. I failed him when he needed me the most, just like they did. After what seemed like several days, I opened my eyes. Another eagle was standing beside me. In front of him were 3 stones, one blue, one green, and one red. Eat them, he said. When I did, my whole being was renewed, and both a great joy and great soberness flooded my soul. When I stood up, I caught sight of the same 3 stones, set into the handle of my sword, and then on each of my shoulders. These are now yours forever, the eagle said. They cannot be taken from you, and you cannot lose them. But I did not finish this last one, I protested. Christ alone will ever finish that test, he replied. You have done well, but you must go on now. Where to? I asked. You must decide, but with time getting shorter, I will suggest that you try to get to the top soon, the eagle replied as he departed in an obvious hurry. Then I remembered the doors. I immediately started toward the doors that had been so appealing. When I reached the first one, it simply did not appeal to me anymore. Then I went to another, and it felt the same. Something seems to have changed. Oh, I remarked out loud. You have changed, the entire troop of angels replied at once. I turned to look at them and was amazed at how much they had changed. They no longer had the naive look they had before, but were now more regal, wise looking than any of the angels I had seen. I knew they reflected what had also taken place in me, but I now felt uncomfortable just thinking about myself. I ask for your counsel, I said to the leader. Listen to your heart, he said. That is where these great truths now abide. I have never been able to trust my own heart, I responded. It is subject to so many delusions. deceptions, and selfish ambitions that it is hard to even hear the Lord speaking to me above the clamor of it. Sir, with the red stone now in your heart, I do not believe that will continue to be the case, the leader offered with uncharacteristic confidence. I leaned again to the wall, thinking that the eagle was not here when I needed him the most. He had been this way before, and we would know which door to choose. As I pondered, the terrible door was the only one that I could think of. Out of curiosity, I decided to go back and look at it. I had departed from it so fast the first time that I had not even noticed which truth it represented. As I approached it, I could feel the fear welling up inside of me, but not nearly as bad as the first time. In great contrast to the others, it was very dark around this door, and I had to get very close to read the truth over it. Mildly surprised, I read the judgment seat of Christ. Why is this truth so fearful? I asked aloud, knowing that the angels would not answer me. As I looked at it, I knew that it was the one I should go through. There are many reasons that it is fearful. The familiar voice of the eagle responded. I'm glad you came back. I replied, have I made a bad choice? No, you have chosen well. This door will take you back to the top of the mountain faster than any other. It is fearful because the greatest fear in the creation has a source through that door, the holy fear of God. The greatest wisdom that men can know in this life or in the life to come are found through those doors, but very few will go through them. But why is this door so dark? I asked. The light of these doors reflect the attention that the church is presently giving to the truths behind them. The truth behind that door is one of the most neglected of these times, but it is one of the most important. You will understand when you enter. The greatest authority that men can receive will only be entrusted to those who will go through this door. When you see Christ Jesus sitting on this throne, you too will be prepared to sit with him on it. Then this door would not be so dark and forbidding if we had just given more attention to this truth. That is correct. If men knew the glory that is revealed behind that door, it would be one of the most brilliant. The eagle lamented. However, it is still a difficult door to pass through. I was told to return and encourage you, because you will soon need it. You will see a greater glory, but also a greater terror than you have ever known. But know that because you have chosen the difficult way now, it will be much easier for you later. Because you are willing to face this hard truth now, you will not suffer loss later. Many love to know his kindness, but very few are willing to know his severity. If you do not know both, you will always be in danger of deception and a fall from his great grace. I know that I could never come here if I had not spent the time that I did at the Red Stone. How could I keep trying to take the easy way when that is so contrary to the nature of the Lord? But now you have chosen, so go quickly. Another great battle is about to begin, and you are needed at the front. The judgment seat of Christ. I gazed one final time around the huge room inside of the mountain. The treasures of the truth of salvation were kept here. It seemed that there was no end to their expanse or beauty. I could not imagine that the rooms which contained the other great truths of the faith could be any more glorious. This helped me to understand why so many Christians never wanted to leave this place. The large gems which represented the different aspects of salvation all exuded a glory far beyond any earthly beauty. It was wonderful, beyond description, and I knew that I could stay here for eternity and never get bored. The eagle who was standing next to me almost shouted, "You must go on." Then more calmly, he continued, "There is no greater peace and safety than to abide in the Lord's salvation. You were brought here to know this because you will need it where you are now going. But you must not stay here any longer." The eagle's statement about the peace and safety touched something in me. I thought about the courageous warriors who had fought in the battle from the first level of the mountain. Salvation. They had fought so well and delivered so many, but they had also all been badly wounded. Then the eagle again interrupted my thoughts, as if he were listening to them. God has a different definition of peace and safety than we do. To be wounded in the fight is a great honor. That is why the Apostle Paul boasted of his beatings and stonings. There is no courage unless there is real danger. The Lord said he would go with Joshua to fight for the promised land, but over and over exhorted him to be strong and courageous, because he was going to have to fight and there would be dangers. It is in this way the Lord proves those who are worthy of the promises they love God and his provision more than their own security. Courage is a demonstration of true faith. The Lord never promised that his way would be easy, but it would be worth it. The courage of those who fought from the level of salvation moved the angels of heaven to esteem what God has wrought in the fallen race of men. They took their wounds in the terrible onslaught, but they did not quit and they did not retreat. Even so, by climbing the mountain, you were able to fight with an authority that ultimately freed even more souls. Many more souls will fill these rooms to the great joy of heaven if you go on. I then turned and looked at the dark and forbidding door over which was written, "The Judgment Seat of Christ." Just as warmth and peace had flooded my soul each time I looked at this door. Everything in me wanted to stay in this room, and nothing in me wanted to go through that door. Again, the eagle answered my thoughts. Before you enter the door to any great truth, you will have these same feelings. You even felt that way when you entered into this room to the treasures of salvation. These fears are the result of the fall. They are the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge from that tree made us all insecure and self-centered. The knowledge of good and evil makes the true knowledge of God seems fearful, when in fact every truth from above leads to an even greater peace and security. Even the judgments of God are to be desired, because all of his ways are perfect. By now I had experienced enough to know that what seems right is often the least fruitful path, and sometimes the road to tragedy. Throughout my journey, the path on which it seemed that the most was risked was the path that led to the greatest reward. Even so, each time it seemed that more was being risked. To make the choice to go on, therefore, got harder each time. It takes more faith to walk in the higher realms of the Spirit, the eagle stated, seeming a little more irritated. The Lord gave us a map to his kingdom when he said, "If you seek to save your life, you will lose it. But if you will lose your life for my sake, you will find it." Those words alone can keep you on the path to the top of the mountain and will lead you to victory in the great battle ahead. They will also help you to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. He added, looking toward the door. I knew I had to go. I knew that I should remember this glorious room and the treasures of salvation, but I also knew that I should not look back to them again. I had to go on. I turned, and with all of the courage I could muster, opened the door to the judgment seat of Christ and stepped through it. The troop of angels that had been assigned to me took positions all around the door, but did not enter. What's the matter? Aren't you coming? I demanded, badly wanting the security of their company. Where you are going now, you must go alone. We will be waiting for you. On the other side. Without responding, I turned and started walking. Before I could change my mind, it was the hardest thing I had ever done. I was in the most frightening darkness I had ever experienced. The most terrible fears rose up within me. Soon, I began to think that I had stepped into hell itself. I thought about retreating, but when I looked back, I could see nothing. The door was closed, and I could not even see where it was located. Resolving that I now had to go on, I moved slowly, praying for the Lord to help me. As I did, peace began to grow in my heart. I then noticed that the dark was no longer cold, but began to feel comfortable. Then I started to behold a dim light. Gradually, it became a glorious light so wonderful that I felt that I was entering into heaven itself. Now the glory increased with every step. I wondered how anything this wonderful could have an entrance so dark and forbidding. I wanted to savor every step before taking another. Soon, the path opened into a hall so large that I felt that the earth itself could not contain it. The beauty of it could not even be imagined by human architects. I had never experienced anything like what filled my soul as I beheld this room. At the far end was the source of the glory that emanated from everything else in the room. I knew that it was the Lord, and I was a little bit afraid as I began to walk toward Him. I did not even think about how great the distance was. It was all so wonderful that I felt that I could walk forever and enjoy every step. In earthly terms, that somehow did not relate to here. It would have taken me many days to reach the throne. My eyes were so fixed on the glory of the Lord that I had walked a long time before I noticed that I was passing multitudes of people who were standing in ranks to my left. There were just as many to my right, but they were so far away that I did not notice them until I reached the throne. As I looked at them, I had to stop. They were dazzling, more regal than anyone I had ever seen. Their countenance was captivating. Never had such peace and confidence graced the human face. Each one was beautiful beyond any earthly comparison. As I turned toward those who were close to me, they bowed in a greeting, as if they knew me. "How is it that you know me?" I asked, surprised at my own boldness to ask such a question of them. "You are one of the saints who is fighting in the last battle," a man close by responded. "Everyone here knows you and all of those who are now fighting on the earth. We are the saints who have served the Lord in the generations before you. We are the great cloud of witnesses who have been given the right to behold the last battle. We know all of you, and we see all that you do." I then noticed someone I had known on earth. He had been a faithful believer, but I did not think he had done anything of significance. He was so physically unattractive on earth that it had made him shy. Here he had the same features, but was somehow more handsome than any person I had known on earth. He stepped up to me with an assurance and dignity that I had never seen in him or anyone before. Heaven is much greater than we could have dreamed while on earth, he began. This room is but the threshold of realms of glory that are far beyond the ability we had to comprehend. It is also true that the second death is much more terrible than we understood. Neither heaven or hell are like we thought they were. If I had known on earth what I know here, I would not have lived the way that I did. You are blessed with a great grace to have come here before you have died, he said while looking at my garments. I then looked at myself. I still had the old mantle of humility on, with the armor under it. I felt both foul and crude, standing before those who were so regal and beautiful. I began to think that I was in serious trouble if I was going to appear before the Lord like this. Like the eagles, my old acquaintance could understand my thoughts, and he replied to them, "Those who come here wearing that mantle have nothing to fear. That mantle is the highest rank of honor, and it is why they all bowed to you while you passed." "I did not notice anyone bowing to me," I replied, a bit disconcerted. "It is not improper," he continued. "Here we show each other the respect that is due. Even the angels serve us here, but only our God and His Christ are worshipped." I was still ashamed. I had to retrain myself to keep from bowing to these glorious ones, while at the same time wanting to hide myself because I looked so bad. Then I began lamenting the fact that my thoughts here were just as foolish here as they were on earth, and here everyone knew them. I felt both stained and stupid standing before these who were so awesome and pure. Again, my old acquaintance responded to these thoughts. "We have our incorruptible bodies now, and you do not. Our minds are no longer hindered by sin. We are therefore able to comprehend many times what even the greatest earthly mind can fathom, and we will spend eternity growing in our ability to understand. This is so that we can know the Father and understand the glory of His creation. On earth, you cannot even begin to understand what the least of these here know, and we are the least of those here." "How could you be the least?" I asked with disbelief.
There is an aristocracy here. The rewards for our earthly lives are the eternal positions that we have here. This great multitude here are those whom the Lord called foolish virgins. We knew the Lord and trusted in His cross for deliverance from damnation, but we did not really live for Him but for ourselves. We did not keep our vessels filled with the oil of the Holy Spirit. We have eternal life, but we wasted our lives on earth. I was really surprised by this, but I also knew that no one could lie in that place. The foolish virgins gnashed their teeth in the outer darkness, I protested. And that we did. The grief that we experienced when we understood how we had so wasted our lives was beyond any grief possible on earth. The darkness of that grief can only be understood by those who have experienced it. Such darkness is magnified when it is revealed next to the glory of the one we failed. You are standing now among the lowest rank in heaven. There are no greater fools than the ones who know the great salvation of God, but then go on living for themselves. To come here and learn the reality of that folly is a grief beyond what an earthly soul can experience. We are those who suffered this outer darkness because of this greatest of follies. I was still incredulous, but you are more glorious and full of more joy and peace than I even imagined, even for those in heaven. I do not feel any remorse in you, and yet I know that here you cannot lie. This does not make sense to me. Looking me straight in the eyes, he continued, "The Lord also loves us with a love greater than you can yet understand. Before his judgment seat, I tasted the greatest darkness of soul and remorse that can be experienced. Though here, we do not measure time as you do. It seemed to last for as long as my life on earth had lasted. All of my sins and follies, which I had not repented of, passed before me and before all who are here. The grief of this you cannot understand until you have experienced it. I felt that I was in the deepest dungeon of hell, even as I stood before the Lord. He was resolute until my life had been completely reviewed. When I said I was sorry and asked for the mercy of his cross, he wiped away my tears and took away the great darkness. He looked at me with a love that was beyond anything that you can now understand. He gave me this robe. I no longer feel the darkness or bitterness that I knew as I stood before him, but I remember it. Only here can you remember such things without continuing to feel the pain. A moment in the lowest part of heaven is much greater than 1,000 years of the highest life on earth. Now my mourning at my folly has been turned into joy, and I know that I will know joy forever, even if I am in the lowest place in heaven. I began to think again of the treasures of salvation. Somehow I knew that all that this man had told me was revealed by those treasures. Every step I had taken up the mountain or into it had revealed that his ways are both more fearful and more wonderful than I had known before. Looking at me intently, my former acquaintance continued, "You are not here to understand, but to experience. The next level of rank here is many times greater than what we have. Each level after is that much greater than the previous one. It is not just that each level has an even more glorious spiritual body, but that each level is closer to the throne where all of the glory comes from. Even so, I no longer feel the grief of my failure. I really deserve nothing. I am here by grace alone, and I am so thankful for what I have. He is so worthy to be loved. I could be doing many wondrous things now in the different realms of heaven, but I would rather stay here and just behold the glory, even if I am on the outer fringes." Then, with a distant look in his eyes, he added, "Everyone in heaven is now in this room to watch his great mystery unfold, and to watch those of you who will fight the last battle." "Can you see him from here?" I asked. "I see his glory far away, but I cannot see him." "I can see many times better than you can," he answered. "And yes, I can see him and all that he is doing, even from here. I can also hear him. I can also behold the earth. He gave us all that power. We are the great cloud of witnesses who are beholding you." He departed back into the ranks, and I began walking again, trying to understand all that he had said to me. As I looked over the great host that he had said were the foolish virgins, the ones who had spiritually slept away their life on earth, I knew that if any one of them appeared on earth, now that they would be worshipped as gods, and yet they were the very least of those who were here. I then began to think of all of the time that I had wasted in my life. It was such an overwhelming thought that I stopped. Then parts of my life began to pass before me. I began to experience a terrible grief over this one sin. I too had been one of the greatest of fools. I may have kept more oil in my lamp than others, but now I knew how foolish I had been to measure what was required of me by how others were doing. I, too, was one of the foolish virgins. Just when I thought I would collapse under the weight of this terrible discovery, a man who I had known and esteemed as one of the great men of God I had known, came forward to steady me. Somehow, his touch revived me. He then greeted me warmly. He was a man that I had wanted to be discipled by. I had met him, but we did not get along well. Like a number of others I had tried to get close enough to learn from, I was an irritation to him, and he finally asked me to leave. For years I had felt guilty about this, feeling that I had missed a great opportunity because of some flaw in my character. Even though I had put it out of my mind, I still carried the weight of this failure. When I saw him, it all surfaced, and a sick feeling came over me. Now, he was so regal that I felt even more repulsive and embarrassed by my poor state. I wanted to hide, but there was no way I could avoid him here. To my surprise, his warmth toward me was so genuine that he quickly put me at ease. There did not seem to be any barriers between us. In fact, the love I felt coming from him almost completely took away my self-consciousness. I have waited eagerly for this meeting, he said. You were waiting for me? I asked. Why? You are just one of many that I am waiting for. I did not understand until my judgment that you were one that I was called to help, to even disciple, but I rejected you. Sir, I protested, it would have been a great honor to be discipled by you, and I am very thankful for the time that I did have with you. But I was so arrogant, I deserved your rejection. I know that my rebellion and pride has kept me from ever having a real spiritual father. This was not your fault, but mine. It is true that you were prideful, but that is not why I was offended with you. I was offended because of my insecurity, which made me want to control everyone around me. I was offended that you would not accept everything that I said without questioning it. I then started to look for anything that was wrong with you to justify my rejection. I began to feel that if I could not control you, that you would one day embarrass me and my ministry. I esteem my ministry more than I did the people for whom it was given to me. So I drove many like you away, he said. With a genuineness that is unknown in the realms of earth, he continued, all children are rebellious and think that the world revolves around them. That is why they need parents to raise them. Almost every child will at times bring reproach on his family, but he is still a part of the family. I turned away many of God's own children that he had entrusted to me for getting them safely to maturity. I failed with most of them. Most of them suffered terrible wounds and failures that I could have helped them to avoid. Many of them are now prisoners of the enemy. I built a large organization and had considerable influence in the church, but the greatest gifts that the Lord trusted to me were the ones who were sent to me for discipline, many of whom I rejected. Had I not been so self-centered and concerned with my own reputation, I would be a king here. I was called to one of the highest thrones. All that you have and will accomplish would have been in my heavenly account as well. Instead, much of what I gave my attention to was of very little true, eternal significance. What looks good on earth looks very different here. What will make you a king on earth will often be a stumbling block to keep you from being a king here. What will make you a king here is lowly and unesteemed on earth. Will you forgive me? Of course, I said, quite embarrassed. But I too am in need of your forgiveness. I still think that it was my awkwardness and rebellion that made it difficult for you. It is true that you were not perfect, and I discerned some of your problems rightly, but that is never cause for rejection, he replied. The Lord did not reject the world when I saw its failures. He did not reject me when he saw my sin. He laid down his life for us. It is always the greater who must lay down his life for the lesser. I was more mature. I had more authority than you, but I became like one of the goats in the parable. I rejected the Lord by rejecting you and the others that he sent to me. As he talked, his words were striking me deeply. I too was guilty of everything that he was relenting of. Many young men and women who I had brushed off as not being important enough for my time were now passing through my mind. How desperately I wanted to return now and gather them together. This grief that I began to feel was even worse than I had felt about wasting time. I had wasted people. Now many of these were prisoners of the enemy, wounded and captured during the battle on the mountain. This whole battle was for people, and yet people were often regarded as the least important. We will fight for truths more than for the people for whom they are given. We will fight for ministries while running roughshod over the people in them. And many people think of me as a spiritual leader. I am truly the least of the saints, I thought to myself. I understand how you feel, remarked another man I recognized as one I considered one of the greatest Christian leaders of all time. Paul the Apostle said near the end of his life that he was the least of the saints. Then just before his death, he even called himself the greatest of sinners. Had he not learned that in his life on earth, he too would have been in jeopardy of being one of the least of the saints in heaven. Because he learned it on earth, he is now one of those closest to the Lord and will be one of the highest in rank for all of eternity. Seeing this man in the company of the foolish virgins was the greatest surprise I had yet. I cannot believe that you too are one of the foolish who slept away their lives on earth. Why are you here? I am here because I made one of the most grave mistakes you can make as one entrusted with the glorious gospel of our Savior. Just as the Apostle Paul progressed from not considering himself inferior to the greatest apostles to being the greatest of sinners, I took the opposite course. I started out knowing that I had been one the greatest of sinners who had found grace, but I ended up thinking that I was one of the greatest apostles. It was because of my great pride, not insecurity like our friend here, that I began to attack everyone who did not see everything just the way I did. Those who followed me, I stripped of their own callings and even their personalities, pressuring them to all become just like me. No one around me could be themselves. No one dared to question me because I would crush them into powder. I thought that by making others smaller, I made myself larger. I thought that I was supposed to be the Holy Spirit to everyone. From the outside, my ministry looked like a smooth running machine where everyone was in unity and there was perfect order, but it was the order of a concentration camp. I took the Lord's own children and made them automatons in my own image instead of his. In the end, I was not even serving the Lord, but the idol I had built to myself. By the end of my life, I was actually an enemy of the true gospel, at least in practice, even if my teachings and writings seemed impeccably biblical. If that is true, that you became an enemy of the gospel, how is it that you are still here, I question? By the grace of God, I did trust in the cross for my own salvation, even though I actually kept other men from it, leading them to myself rather than to Him. The Lord remains faithful to us, even when we are unfaithful. It was also by His grace that the Lord took me from the earth sooner than He would have, just so those who were under me could find Him and come to know Him. I could not have been more stunned to think that this was true of this particular man. History had given us a very different picture of him. Reading what was going on in my heart, he continued, God does have a different set of history books than those on the earth. You have had a glimpse of this, but you do not yet know how different they are. Earthly histories will pass away, but the books that are kept here will last forever. If you can rejoice in what heaven is recording about your life, you are blessed indeed. Men see through a glass darkly, so their histories will always be clouded and sometimes completely wrong. Very few, even very few Christians have the true gift of discernment. Without this gift, it is impossible to accurately discern truth in those of the present or the past. Even with this gift, it is difficult. Until you have been here and been stripped, you will judge others through distorted prejudices, either positive or negative. That is why we were warned not to judge before the time. Until we have been here, we just cannot really know what is in the heart of others, whether they are performing good or evil deeds. There have been good motives in even the worst of men, and evil motives in even the best of them. Only here can men be judged by both their deeds and their motives. When I return to earth, will I be able to discern history accurately because I have been here? You are here because you prayed for the Lord to judge you severely, to correct you ruthlessly, so that you could serve Him more perfectly. This was one of the most wise requests you ever made. The wise judge themselves, lest they be judged. The even wiser ask for the judgments of the Lord, because they realize that they cannot even judge themselves very well. Having come here, you will leave with far more wisdom and discernment. But on earth you will always see through a glass darkly, to at least some degree. Your experience here will help you to know men better, but only when you are fully here can you know them fully. When you leave here, you will be more impressed by how little you know men, rather than by how well you know them. This is just as true in relation to the histories of men. I have been allowed to talk with you because I have, in a sense, discipled you through my writings, and to know the truth about me will help you greatly, the great reformer concluded. Then a woman stepped forward who I did not know. Her beauty and grace was breathtaking, but it was not sensual or seductive in any way. She was the definition of dignity and nobility. I was his wife on earth, she began. Much of what you know of him actually came from me. Therefore, what I am about to say is not just about him, but about us. You can reform the church without reforming your own soul. You can dictate the course of history and yet not do the Father's will or glorify His Son. If you commit yourself to making human history, you may do it, but it is a fleeting accomplishment that will evaporate like a wisp of smoke. But your husband's work, or your work, greatly impacted every generation after him for good. It is hard to imagine how dark the world would have been without him. I protested. True, but you can gain the whole world and still lose your own soul. Only if you keep your own soul pure can you impact the world for the truly lasting eternal purpose of God. My husband lost his soul to me, and he only gained it at the end of his life. because I was taken from the earth so that he could. Much of what he did more for me than for the Lord. I pressured him and even gave him much of the knowledge that he taught. I used him as an extension of my own ego, because as a woman at the time, I could not be recognized as a spiritual leader myself. I took over his life so that I could live my life through him. Soon, I had him doing everything just to prove himself to me. You must have loved her very much, I said, looking at him. No, I did not love her at all. Neither did she love me. In fact, after just a few years of marriage, we did not even like each other. But we both needed each other. So we found a way to work together. The more successful we became in this way, the more unhappy we became, and the more deception we used to fool those who followed us. We were empty wretches by the end of our lives. The more influence that you gain by your own self-promotion, the more striving you must do to keep your influence, and the more dark and cruel your life will become. Kings feared us, but we feared everyone, from the kings to the peasants. We could trust no one because we were living in such deception ourselves. We did not even trust each other. We preached love and trust because we wanted everyone to love and trust us, but we feared and secretly despised everyone ourselves. If you preach the greatest truths but do not live them, you are only the greatest hypocrite. Their words began to pound me like a hammer. I could see that already my life was heading in the same direction. How much was I doing to promote myself rather than Christ? I began to see how much I did just to prove myself to others, especially those who disliked me or who I felt in competition with in some way. I began to see how much of my own life was built on the facades of a projected image that belied who I really was. But here, I could not hide. This great cloud of witnesses all knew who I was beyond the veil of my projected motives. I looked again at this couple. They were now so guileless and so truly noble that it was impossible to question their motives. They were gladly exposing their most devious sins for my sake, and were genuinely glad to be able to do it. I may have had a wrong concept of you by your history and your writings, but I have even more esteem for you now. I pray that I can carry from this place the integrity and freedom that you have now. I'm tired of trying to live up to projected images of myself. How I long for that freedom. I lamented, wanting desperately to remember every detail of this encounter. Then the famous reformer offered a final exhortation. Do not try to teach others to do what you are doing yourself. Reformation is not just a doctrine. True reformation only comes from union with the Savior. When you are yoked with Christ, carrying the burdens that He gives you, He will be with you and carry them for you. You can only do His work when you are doing it with Him, not just for Him. Only the Spirit can beget that which is spirit. If you are yoked with Him, you will do nothing for the sake of politics or history. Anything that you do because of political pressures or opportunities will only lead you to the end of your true ministry.
Thank you for watching. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe. Click on the notification bell so you can be alerted anytime a new video is uploaded. And please don't forget, share and be a blessing to someone. God richly bless you. Shalom.